The world is an ugly place with some pretty creepy people. These are people who have committed unspeakable crimes and have gone on to killing numerous people before the law got the better of them. Prisons are known to be a scary place, not just for the punishment conditions in which the inmates live in, but for the inmates themselves. These are the most dangerous prisoners of all time. Let's start with the Eyeball Man. The Eyeball Man Jason Barnum was sentenced to 22 years in prison for shooting an Alaska police officer. The shooting happened when police were investigating home burglaries and car thefts. Officers were inspecting a hotel in 2012 when Barnum opened fire from a bathroom. 2 officers shot back, striking Barnum in the arm, and 1 officer was injured. Using surveillance footage, officers traced him to room 209 of the inn, where they found him with 2 others who also had outstanding warrants for their arrests. When police handcuffed one of his companions, Barnum started shooting at officers with a gun stolen from one of the homes he robbed. Barnum later admitted in court to committing thefts and burglaries to feed his heroin addiction. According to the Alaska Dispatch, court records show Jason run-ins with the law as far back to 1993, including burglary charges in 1994, 2000, and 2005 and multiple felonies including forgery. What made him seem even more dangerous was his tattoo-filled visage. Barnum had one of his eyeballs, yes his eyeball, completely tattooed. It's totally black. Photographs from his arraignment show an eyeball tattooed in the middle of his forehead and a sinister skull painted on the top of his bald head. The Facebook image shows the terrifying tattoos continue on his body, with the word pain written on his right bicep and a Celtic cross. He definitely is scary. Number 2. The Red Ripper. Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo was an infamous Soviet serial killer. He was nicknamed the Red Ripper and is known to have raped and mutilated over 52 innocent women. According to reports, he confessed to a mind-boggling 56 murders and was tried for 53 in 1992 and is by far one of the most notorious jail inmates of all time. In September 1978, Chikatilo moved to Shakti, where he committed his first documented murder. On the evening of 22 December, he lured a 9-year-old girl named Yelena Zakatnova to an old house that he had secretly purchased. He attempted to rape her, but failed to achieve an erection. When the girl struggled, he choked her and stabbed her 3 times in the abdomen, ejaculating while stabbing the child. Her body was found 2 days later. Following Zakatnova's murder, Chikatilo was able to achieve sexual arousal and orgasm only through stabbing and slashing women and children to death, and he later claimed that the urge to relive the experience had overwhelmed him. Many of the victims' bodies bore evidence of mutilation to the eye sockets. Pathologists concluded these injuries had been caused by a knife, leading investigators to the conclusion the killer had gouged out the eyes of his victims. Chikatilo's adult female victims were often prostitutes or homeless women whom he would lure to secluded areas with promises of alcohol or money. He would typically attempt intercourse with these victims, but he would usually be unable to achieve or maintain an erection. This would send him into a murderous fury, particularly if the woman mocked his impotence. He would achieve orgasm only when he stabbed and slashed the victim to death. Chikatilo's child and adolescent victims were of both sexes. He would lure these victims to secluded areas using a variety of ruses, usually formed in the initial conversation with the victim, such as promising them assistance or company, or with an offer of food or candy. The police caught up with him finally, due to his name coming up in the suspect list even after years had gone by. He was formally sentenced to death plus 86 years for the 52 murders and 5 counts of sexual assault for which he had been found guilty. On 14 February 1994, Chikatilo was taken from his death row cell to a soundproofed room in Novotcherkassk prison and executed with a single gunshot behind the right ear. He was buried in an unmarked grave at the prison cemetery. Number 3. Aileen Wuornos. Aileen Wuornos was involved in the cold-blooded murder of 7 men between 1989 and 1990. She usually blames the men she dated, and her crimes involved raping and shooting them at point-blank range. Wuornos never met her father, as he was incarcerated at the time of her birth, and when she was almost 4 years old, her mother abandoned her and her sibling, leaving them with their maternal grandparents, Lori and Britta Wuornos, who by the way are both alcoholics, who legally adopted Keith and Aileen on March 18, 1960. Unfortunately, this was not your typical loving grandparents, as Wuornos said. that her alcoholic grandfather had sexually assaulted and beaten her when she was a child. Before beating her, he would force her to strip out of her clothes. At age 14, she became pregnant, having been raped by an accomplice of her grandfather. Her unfriendly childhood is what led her down the path of murder. Wuornos murdered 7 men within a period of 12 months. The first was Richard Charles Mallory, age 51. November 30, 1989, an electronics store owner in Clearwater. Wuornos' first victim was a convicted rapist whom she claimed to have killed in self-defense. Wuornos claimed she was sodomized and brutally beaten after being driven to an abandoned area for sexual requests. 2 days later, a Volusia County deputy sheriff found Mallory's abandoned vehicle. On December 13, his body was found several miles away in a wooded area. He had been shot several times. 2 bullets to the left lung were found to have been the cause of death. Another was David Andrew Spears, age 47, construction worker in Winter Garden. He was declared missing as of May 19, 1990. On June 1, 1990, his naked body was found along U.S. Route 19 in Florida in Citrus County. He had been shot 6 times by a .22 pistol and 5 more others. On January 9, 1991, Wuornos was arrested on an outstanding warrant at the Last Resort, a biker bar in Volusia County. 3 days later, on January 16, 1991, Wuornos confessed to the murders. She claimed the men had tried to rape her, and she killed them in self-defense. Wuornos was incarcerated at the Florida Department of Corrections Broward Correctional Institution, BCI, on death row for women, then transferred to the Florida State Prison for execution. In a 2001 petition to the Florida Supreme Court, she stated her intention to dismiss her legal counsel and terminate all pending appeals. "I killed those men," she wrote, "robbed them as cold as ice. And I'd do it again too. There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system. I am so sick of hearing this she's crazy stuff. I've been evaluated so many times. I'm competent, sane, and I'm trying to tell the truth. I'm one who seriously hates human life and would kill again." Wuornos' execution took place on October 9, 2002. She declined her last meal, which could have been anything under $20, and opted for a cup of coffee instead. Her last words were, "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus, June 6, like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back, I'll be back." Number 4. John Wayne Gacy. You must have all heard of and watched the 2017 Hollywood blockbuster It, the movie, or rather the novel the movie was based on is actually based on John Wayne Gacy. Gacy started off performing as a clown to entertain children and raise money for charity. He named himself Pogo the Clown. But under this colorful clown avatar was a remorseless criminal. Gacy was a rapist and a torturer and was convicted of killing 33 teenage boys and young men between January 1972 and late 1978. He usually lured a lone victim to his house, although on more than one occasion Gacy also had what he called doubles, 2 victims killed in the same evening. Several victims were lured with the promise of a job, others with an offer of a drink, drugs, or money for sex. His victims included people he knew and random individuals lured from Chicago's Greyhound bus station, Bughouse Square, or simply off the streets. Some victims were grabbed by force, others conned into believing Gacy, who often carried a sheriff's badge and had spotlights on his black Oldsmobile, was a policeman. Inside Gacy's home, his usual modus operandi was to ply a youth with drink, drugs, or generally gain his trust. Gacy would then produce a pair of handcuffs to show a magic trick, sometimes as part of a clowning routine. He typically cuffed his own hands behind his back, then surreptitiously released himself with the key which he hid between his fingers. He then offered to show his intended victim how to release himself from the handcuffs. With his victim manacled and unable to free himself, Gacy then made a statement to the effect that the trick is, you have to have the key. Gacy referred to this act of restraining his victim as the handcuff trick. Having restrained his victim, Gacy proceeded to rape and torture his captive. He frequently began by sitting on his victim's chest before forcing the victim to fellate him. He then inflicted acts of torture including burning with cigars, making his captive imitate a horse as he sat on their back, and pulled upon makeshift reins around their necks to immobilize his captive's legs. Before engaging in acts of torture, Gacy frequently manacled their ankles to a 2x4 with handcuffs attached at each end an act inspired by the Houston mass murders. Gacy typically murdered his victims by placing a rope tourniquet around their neck before progressively tightening the rope with a hammer handle. He referred to this act as the rope trick, frequently informing his captive, "This is the last trick." Occasionally, the victim had convulsed for an hour or two before dying, although several victims died by asphyxiation from cloth gags stuffed deep into their throat. After death, Gacy usually stored the victims' bodies under his bed for up to 24 hours before burying his victim in the crawl space, where he periodically poured quicklime to hasten the decomposition of his victims. Some victims' bodies were taken to his garage and embalmed prior to their burial. Gacy was brought to trial on February 6, 1980, charged with 33 murders. He was tried in Cook County, Illinois, before Judge Louis Garippo. The jury was selected from Rockford because of significant press coverage in Cook County. In the sentencing phase of the trial, the jury deliberated for more than 2 hours before sentencing Gacy to death for each murder committed after the Illinois statute on capital punishment came into effect in June 1977. His execution was set for June 2, 1980. Number 5. Rodney Alcala. Also known as the dating game killer, Alcala got a sick thrill from photographing his victims, mostly attractive young women, after murdering them and putting their corpses in distorted postures. His first victim was Robin Samso, a 12-year-old girl from Huntington Beach. She disappeared somewhere between the beach and her ballet class on June 20, 1979. Her decomposing body was found 12 days later in the Los Angeles foothills. Samso's friends told police that a stranger had approached them on the beach, asking to take their pictures. Detectives circulated a sketch of the photographer, and Alcala's parole officer recognized him. During a search of Alcala's mother's house in Monterey Park, police found a rental receipt for a storage locker in Seattle. In the locker, they found Samso's earrings. Alcala was arrested in July 1979 and held without bail. In 1980 he was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death for Samso's murder, but the verdict was overturned by the California Supreme Court because jurors had been improperly informed of his prior sex crimes. While preparing their third prosecution in 2003, Orange County, California investigators learned that Alcala's DNA, sampled under a new state law over his objections, matched semen left at the rape-murder scenes of 2 women in Los Angeles. Additional evidence, including another cold case DNA match in 2004, led to Alcala's indictment for the murders of 4 additional women. Jill Barcombe, 18, and New York runaway found rolled up like a ball in the Los Angeles ravine in 1977. Georgia Wickstead, 27, bludgeoned in her Malibu apartment in 1977. Charlotte Lamb, 31, raped, strangled, and left in the laundry room of an El Segundo apartment complex in 1978. And Jill Parento, 21, killed in her Burbank apartment in 1979. He is said to have killed at least nearly 130 women. On March 2010, Alcala was sentenced to death for the 3rd time. Number 6. Dennis Raider BTK. Dennis Raider called himself BTK, meaning bind 'em, torture 'em, kill 'em. He was one of the most diabolical serial killers in American history. With each and every victim that he tortured, he made sure to have an elaborate photography session and kept it tucked away in a secret basement. According to reports, when he launched his first vicious attack in 1974 on the Otero family, he didn't even know how to kill and literally tortured them to death. The victims were Joseph Otero, age 38, Julie Otero, age 33, Joseph Otero Jr., age 9, and Josephine Otero, age 11. Their bodies were discovered by the family's 3 older children, who had been at school at the time of the killings. After his first stint with murder, he went on to kill nearly 10 people. Between the spring of 1974 and winter 1977, Raider killed 3 more women, and in early 1978, and sent a letter to television station Cake in Wichita, claiming responsibility for the murders of the Oteros and the women he murdered. He suggested many possible names for himself, including the one that stuck, BTK. He demanded media attention in his second letter, and it was finally announced that Wichita did indeed have a serial killer at large. One of his victims was Maureen Hedge, aged 53. She was found on May 5, 1985, at East 53rd Street North between North Webb Road and North Greenwich Road in Wichita. This one was weird because Raider killed her and took her dead body to his church, the Christ Lutheran Church, where he was, get this, the president of the church council. There, he photographed her body in various bondage positions. Raider had previously stored black plastic sheets and other materials at the church in preparation for the murder and then later dumped the body in a remote ditch. He had called his plan Project Cookie. In his letters to police, Raider asked if his writings, if put on a floppy disk, could be traced or not. The police answered his question in a newspaper ad posted in the Wichita Eagle, saying it would be safe to use the disk. On February 16, 2005, Raider sent a purple 1.44 megabyte Memorex floppy disk to Fox TV affiliate KSAS-TV in Wichita. Also enclosed were a letter, a gold-colored necklace with a large medallion, and a photocopy of the cover of Rules of Prey, a 1989 novel about a serial killer. Police found metadata embedded in a deleted Microsoft Word document that was, unknown to Raider, still stored on the floppy disk. The metadata contained the words Christ Lutheran Church, and the document was marked as last modified by Dennis. An internet search determined that the Dennis Raider was president of the church council. When investigators drove by Raider's house, a black Jeep Cherokee, a type of vehicle spotted in one of the earlier crime scenes footage, was parked outside. This was strong circumstantial evidence against Raider, but they needed more direct evidence to detain him. Police obtained a warrant to test a pap smear taken from Raider's daughter at the Kansas State University Medical Clinic. DNA tests showed a familial match between the pap smear and the sample from Wedgerl's fingernails. This indicated that the killer was closely related to Raider's daughter, and combined with the other evidence was enough for police to arrest Raider. BTK was eventually convicted and punished for each death in 2005, and there's a bone-chilling video where he confesses to all his gory deeds. He is now kept in solitary confinement, waiting for his death. Number 7. Mary Malin. Also known as Typhoid Mary, she is known to have infected 51 people, and 3 of those illnesses resulted in death. She is the first person in the United States to be identified as an asymptomatic carrier of the disease, Salmonella typhi. While she carried an extremely contagious bacteria that caused typhoid fever, Mary continued to work as a domestic worker and cooked for people, because of which many were infected. Back in the day, medical facilities for treating an ailment like typhoid were extremely inefficient. From 1900 to 1907, Malin worked as a cook in the New York City area for 8 families, 7 of whom contracted typhoid. In 1900, she worked in Mamaroneck, New York, where within 2 weeks of her employment, residents developed typhoid fever. In 1901, she moved to Manhattan, where members of the family for whom she worked developed fevers and diarrhea, and the laundress died. Malin then went to work for a lawyer and left after 7 of the 8 people in that household became ill. In late 1906, Malin was hired by Walter Bowen, whose family lived on Park Avenue. Their maid got sick on January 23, 1907, and soon Charles Warren's only daughter got typhoid and died. Every time an outbreak occurred, she will relocate to another environment and start working there until she infects people again and causes another outbreak of typhoid fever. In 1915, Malin started working at Sloan Hospital for Women in New York City. Soon 25 people were infected and 2 died. The head obstetrician, Dr. Edward B. Cragen, called an investigator who coincidentally had been on Malin trail since 1906 but had no concrete proof or knew what she looked like. Dr. Edward B. Cragen called the investigator doctor for help. He identified Malin from the servants' verbal descriptions and also by her handwriting. Malin again fled, but the police were able to find and arrest her when she took food to a friend on Long Island. Malin was returned to quarantine on North Brother Island on March 27, 1915. Little is known about her life during her quarantine. She remained on North Brother for more than 23 years, and the authorities gave her a private 1-story cottage. She was allowed to take day trips to the mainland. She spent the last 23 years of her life as a virtual prisoner in forced isolation. Number 8. The NCR Killers. Serial killer Maninder Singh Pandar and his domestic help Surinder Kohli were sentenced to death in connection with one of the 16 murder cases in the NCR killings case. It's a case that shocked the whole of India to its core. The NCR killings came to light with the discovery of 8 skeletal remains of children from the drain of a house in Nathari, Noida. There are accusations of everything from cannibalism, pedophilia, and rape to organ trafficking. Coley's confession was recorded by the magistrate. In his confession, Coley gave a detailed account of how he lured the victims, 9 female children, 2 male children, and 5 adult women, into the house, murdered them, and attempted to have sex with inert bodies, chopped the dead bodies, eat their body parts, and threw the remains in the drain at the back of the bungalow. According to his confession, Coley was a servant at Pandar's house. Pandar used to live alone in the bungalow, and his family resided at Chandigarh. Apart from them, there was another domestic servant named Maya Sarkar, a gardener, and 2 drivers employed by Pandar in his house. All the murders were done by Coley in the drawing room between 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. After each killing, he would carry the body upstairs to a bathroom and chop it into small parts. He would leave the bathroom in that condition and, only after cooking some of the body parts and eating them, he would clean up the bathroom and drawing room. It is very hard to believe that not once in any of the murder, neither Pandar nor any other person employed by him noticed all these things. None was tried as a witness at trial. In 2019, Coley was given a death sentence at his 10th conviction, while Pandar got his death sentences turned into a life sentence. Number 9. Ivan Millet. One of the craziest criminals of Australia, Millet is known for killing innocent backpackers. Ivan was born in Australia with his Yugoslavian family. Ivan was one of 14 children, and all the kids were pretty ratty. The children often got in trouble with the police, and Ivan was constantly getting in trouble with them from the age of about 17 and up for being reckless and stupid, but nothing like murder. Other than that, he grew up with a pretty normal, quiet family. But his hunger for crime came back, and by age 22, he was sentenced to 3 years for theft. He was charged with the abduction of 2 18-year-old hitchhikers and the rape of one of them. While awaiting trial, he was involved in a string of robberies with some of his brothers before faking his suicide and fleeing to New Zealand for a year. He was rearrested in 1974, but the robbery and kidnap cases against him failed at trial with the help of Millet's family lawyer. He went on to murder several tourists and backpackers touring the forest. His trick would involve offering a ride to unsuspecting victims and then take them to another place to murder them, usually lying to them that it was a short route. One backpacker managed to escape from Ivan Millet and was able to testify against him, making him responsible for the murder of, and most likely rape, 7 different backpackers, all in a similar manner. His victims weren't limited to women either. He was arrested and given a life sentence. He died from esophagus and stomach cancer on 27 October 2019. Number 10. Michael Swango. You never know who you can trust. A psychotic serial killer honestly can come in so many different shapes and forms. Michael Swango was a physician originally from Quincy, Illinois, who killed up to 60 innocent people. He only admitted to killing 4 people, but he is linked to numerous other deaths in multiple hospitals over the course of 20 years. People claim that he might have killed more than 60, only he really knows. He was caught out when a nurse noticed a patient deteriorating right after Michael injected something into the patient's IV. He's also been accused of changing his employment records to hide the fact that he poisoned his colleagues with arsenic and served time in prison in the 80s. When he noticed the police were after him, he traveled to Zimbabwe. But even in Africa, his killing spree continued as people complained of severe stomach pains, especially after eating or accepting anything from Swango. He was finally arrested by the D and FBI on his way to Saudi Arabia as he was running away from the Zimbabwe and South Africa authorities. As you might have guessed, he is currently serving a life sentence at the ADX Florence. These people are definitely the most dangerous prisoners in the world, and are we glad that they are not in public anymore. That is all we have for you today. Please do hit the like button and the subscribe button to subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Thank you for watching. Till next time.